I found my name taped to a folding chair in the hallway, outside the ballroom, while chandeliers glowed inside for everyone else. My sister's wedding. My parents' smiles. And me, seated beside the coat rack like an afterthought they hoped wouldn't speak. I stood there, heels sinking into cheap carpet, listening to laughter meant to erase me. In that moment, something inside me snapped, quietly, dangerously. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I left. And the silence I created that night would echo through their lives in ways they never imagined. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from, because if you've ever been treated like this by family, you'll understand why I did what came next. The music hit me first, violin swelling into applause, muffled behind a thick, glimmering door guarded by an usher who smiled at me with confusion, not recognition. My heels clicked against polished marble as I approached the entrance to the ballroom where my sister's wedding was already underway. My dress, deep emerald, silk, the one I had worn just to blend in, suddenly felt like a costume in a play where I was never cast. I handed the usher my name. He scanned a clipboard. Hesitated. Whispered to someone through a mic. Then, with an apologetic glance, he gestured left. "You're seated down the hall, just past the coat check," he said. "A hallway?" I blinked, heat rushing to my ears. I followed his directions, each step feeling heavier, like I was walking into an ambush I hadn't been warned about. Past the linen storage door. Past the waitstaff assembling champagne trays. And there it was, a single, collapsible chair with my name spelled wrong on a crooked white label. No candle centerpiece. No table. Just a hallway echoing with laughter I wasn't invited to join. I stood there, staring. The humiliation wrapped itself around my ribs like a vice. This wasn't an oversight, it was a message. And the message was clear: you are not part of this family celebration. You are a problem we've seated in the shadows. I tried to rationalize. Maybe there was a mistake. Maybe someone would come rushing down the corridor, red-faced and apologetic, inviting me to take a seat next to my parents at the family table. But the only people who passed were hotel staff who averted their eyes, perhaps sensing something raw in mine. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. Then I pulled out my phone, checking for a message, an explanation. Nothing. Just a group photo posted by my aunt on Instagram, everyone smiling, arms wrapped around each other. My sister was in the center, glowing. My mother just behind her, lips painted with the same shade she once told me was too bold for my skin tone. My father had his arm around my brother-in-law, the man who once tried to flirt with me when no one was looking. My seat wasn't forgotten. It was removed. And in that moment, I remembered every time I had been reduced to an afterthought in this narcissistic family drama. Every holiday where I was given chores while my sister was given gifts. Every backhanded compliment from my mother. Every "why can't you be more like her" that had been etched into my bones. I leaned against the cold wall and inhaled, forcing calm into my bloodstream. The humiliation burned, but beneath it, something colder pulsed. A need not just to leave, but to make them feel this silence in ways they'd never forget. This wasn't just about a chair in a hallway. This was about a lifetime of emotional abuse, manipulation, and buried betrayal. I walked back toward the ballroom, not to enter, but to watch, just for a moment. Through a sliver in the door, I saw my mother laugh at something the officiant said. She looked radiant. Satisfied. My father raised his glass to toast. No one noticed I was missing. Because in their minds, I had already been erased. I pressed the side of my finger against the door, anchoring myself in the physical world, trying not to sink into the old wound of invisibility that toxic parents are so skilled at inflicting. But tonight, it wasn't wounding me, it was awakening something. A staff member passed behind me again. He looked surprised to see me still standing there. "You're not joining them?" he asked softly. I smiled, not kindly. No. I wasn't really invited. He didn't know what to say, so he just nodded and moved on. The hallway smelled faintly of bleach and stale roses, and I let it sink in, the scent of being discarded. But here's what they didn't know, I wasn't that girl anymore. The one who begged to be chosen. The one who folded her anger into politeness and called it peace. No, they had done something irreversible tonight. They had made me visible through their cruelty. They had revealed exactly how far they were willing to go to protect their golden child spotlight. And I would remember that. I would remember it when they came to me for help, for money, for comfort. I would remember it when their carefully constructed lies began to crack. I would remember it, and I would not be kind. My phone buzzed. A message from a distant cousin. Hey, where are you? Haven't seen you in any pics. I stared at it. Then slowly typed back, I left. I didn't even wait for the reply. I turned, walked past the floral arch in the lobby, past the sign-in board scrawled with "Welcome to Sarah and Daniel's big day," past the drunk uncle who didn't recognize me enough to greet me. And I stepped out into the cold December air that slapped truth into my skin. Inside that ballroom, they toasted to love, to loyalty, to forever. But they toasted without me. They celebrated while feeding me silence and exile. They thought I'd swallow it. Smile through it. But not this time. This time, they had made the mistake of erasing someone who remembered everything. Who owned receipts, both literal and emotional. Who had spent years learning how power worked in shadows. Who had stayed quiet long enough. A car pulled up to the valet. A woman stepped out in heels taller than mine, wrapped in a fur coat, laughter trailing behind her. She brushed past me like I didn't exist. Exactly. The air stilled as I reached into my purse. Not for a tissue. For a flash drive. Small. Silver. Containing files I wasn't supposed to have. Signed agreements. Transfer deeds. And a scanned copy of a will I had found by accident in my father's filing cabinet 2 years ago. They thought seating me in the hallway would hurt my pride. They didn't realize it would sharpen my memory. And then, as I stepped into the back of the rideshare I had called quietly, without a trace, I caught one last glimpse of the ballroom through the tinted window. My sister twirling in a gown she didn't even pay for. My mother smiling at a man she despised in private. My father bragging about accomplishments that weren't his. The illusion was complete. But illusions crack. And tonight, I had decided to become the pressure. The driver asked, "Where to?" I looked straight ahead. Home. For now. Because this wasn't the end. This was the beginning. And somewhere in that ballroom, someone was about to realize they made a mistake. A very, very expensive mistake. I was always the shadow to her spotlight. Even in baby pictures, I was the one reaching towards something blurred while she looked straight at the camera, perfectly posed. My sister, Sarah, the golden child. She didn't just get more. She got everything. And I was the apology, the compromise, the sibling shaped by expectations no one ever clarified but everyone enforced. They dressed her in silk and smiles. Me, in silence. At 7, she got a piano recital with a cake the size of a coffee table. At 8, I got a slice of store-bought pie and an "oh, we forgot" shrug from my mother, who handed me $20 like it was affection. I spent it on books I read in corners they never entered. This wedding incident, it wasn't new. It was just louder. More public. But the truth is, they've always been rehearsing this erasure in smaller ways. Every time I spoke and was talked over. Every time I asked for help and was met with a guilt trip. Every time Sarah made a mess, and I was handed the broom with a patronizing, "Be the bigger person. You're stronger than her." Stronger became the excuse for giving her softness and giving me nothing. I remember the first time I lent Sarah money. I was 23, working 2 jobs, saving for a deposit on my first apartment. She was 21, fresh out of college, suddenly in love with a boy who dumped her in the same week she overdrew her account. She called me crying. Said she needed $1,500 or she'd lose her car. I gave it to her. My mother called me afterward, not to thank me, but to say, "Don't hold it over her head. She's going through a lot." And when months passed with no repayment, no acknowledgement, it was as if the money had evaporated, like my generosity was something expected, not appreciated. But I remembered. Every time. And so did my bank account. Later, there were more requests. From my parents, mostly. My father needed help co-signing something. My mother asked if I could temporarily put a utility bill in my name when their credit was being restructured. Sarah needed help registering her new Etsy business, and of course, I was the one with the LLC. So it made sense. I knew how taxes worked. I knew what would pass quietly under the radar. What they didn't expect was that I would keep records, not out of paranoia, but out of necessity. Because when you grow up in a family that uses love as leverage, you learn early that memory is your only currency. It's almost funny. How often they talked down to me. How they'd look at Sarah even when she failed, when she dropped out of grad school, when she maxed out their credit card on a destination vacation with a man who vanished halfway through, and say, "She's just finding herself." Meanwhile, when I earned my promotion, my mother barely looked up from her phone. "Just don't burn out," she warned. As if my achievement was dangerous. As if my success threatened the story they'd written where I was the background character in Sarah's fairy tale. And maybe that's why they thought the hallway seat wouldn't break me. Because in their minds, I had no throne to fall from. But they misunderstood something vital. I never wanted a spotlight, I just wanted truth. And now, finally, I had it. Because all those tiny humiliations, the birthdays skipped, the hand-me-down dresses, the gaslighting, they weren't accidents. They were training. Conditioning. And I had absorbed it all like oxygen, until the wedding made it toxic. I sat at my desk the night after I left that cursed ballroom and opened a folder I had named Family Admin years ago. Inside, PDFs, emails, scanned receipts. A loan agreement Sarah had signed, her signature, plain as day. Bank transfers to my mother's account for the electric bill that mysteriously remained in default. A joint business registration for a vintage resale company my parents started in my name to avoid tax complications, without telling me. Legal entanglements they thought I was too naive to notice. I wasn't. They thought I was the scapegoat. They didn't realize I had been studying the rules of their game in silence. That night, I read everything. Highlighted dates. Cross-referenced timelines. What had once felt like random acts of emotional abuse and financial manipulation now formed a pattern. A system. A strategy. My parents had always operated from scarcity, even when they had more than enough. They used guilt as currency. And Sarah, for all her charm and fragility, was their golden investment. They poured into her without accountability. She burned through it all without question. And I became the emergency fund. The emotional sponge. The afterthought who always said yes, then cried in the dark when no one was looking. I wasn't crying now. Now I was mapping. The suspense in this realization wasn't cinematic, it was surgical. A slow, sharp cut through every illusion I had clung to. That we were a close family. That I was loved, just differently. That they didn't mean it when they left me out of photos, out of invitations, out of consideration. No. They meant it. They just thought I'd never say anything. That I was too loyal. Too forgiving. Too quiet. But quiet doesn't mean blind. I leaned back in my chair, light flickering from the laptop onto the ceiling. My phone buzzed with a message from my mother, "We missed you last night. Hope everything's okay." I stared at it, then at the files in front of me. My mother, queen of revisionist history. She'd deny the seat was in the hallway. She'd say it was the venue's mistake. She'd say I should have just come inside. She'd make me the villain for making her uncomfortable. Classic emotional abuse. Classic gaslighting. But this time I wouldn't respond. Because something had shifted. The revenge plan wasn't concrete yet, but the foundation had been laid. Not with fury, but with clarity. They had underestimated me. Not just my pain, but my intelligence. My restraint. My patience. I looked at Sarah's wedding registry still open in another browser tab. The list was cleared. Gifts from uncles, cousins, friends. Mine was absent. So was my name in the wedding program. Not even a mention. It was fine. Because soon, the absence of my name would become the absence of my silence. Soon, they'd learn what happens when the scapegoat stops playing the role. And just as I closed my laptop for the night, another notification pinged. An email from the business registrar. A renewal notice for the LLC I shared with my parents, one I hadn't touched in months. One I now realized I could dissolve with a single click. I didn't click it. Not yet. Because this was going to be slow. Measured. Deserved. And they were going to feel it. One loss at a time. I stood still for a long time, longer than I'd probably realized, heels locked into the cheap carpet like anchors, back straight despite the way my lungs burned. Just outside the ballroom, the music swelled, bright, choreographed joy, the kind you see in wedding videos designed for strangers on Instagram. A curated fantasy. And I, the sister, was not in it. I was somewhere between the staff door and a fire extinguisher, surrounded by the low buzz of generators and the faint scent of floor polish. My name, crooked, misspelled, taped to a folding chair like a warning, still floated behind my eyes. No one had come looking. Not a bridesmaid. Not a cousin. Not even a waiter asking if I wanted water. I wasn't part of the picture. I was a smudge they had successfully cropped out. I didn't cry. I didn't fume. I didn't even shiver, though the air vent hummed directly above me, cold and indifferent. Something inside me had shut off, like flipping a breaker. The part that used to ache, that used to beg, gone. In its place, a strange, heavy stillness. Not peace. Not yet. But clarity. I was no longer trying to be included. I was calculating my exit. I reached into my purse, not to grab my phone, but to feel the keys beneath the lining. I had driven myself here, of course. No one offered a ride. My father had said, "Oh, you're coming? That's great." As if I were a maybe. A last-minute addition to my own sister's wedding. I ran my finger over the jagged edge of the house key like a blade. The ballroom door thudded softly every time someone walked past it inside. Each dull beat a reminder, they were celebrating without me, pretending they didn't know where I was. Pretending they didn't care. I moved slowly, carefully, as if every step mattered. Past the storage room. Past the stacked crates of champagne. Down the side hallway no guest was meant to use. The corridor bent left, then right, narrowing into the hotel's employee wing where fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like a warning. I passed two waiters chatting in Spanish. One of them paused and looked at me with vague recognition. "Are you lost, miss?" he asked, his voice kind. I almost laughed. "No," I said. "I'm exactly where they put me." He didn't understand, but he nodded anyway, probably used to strange moments on wedding nights. I walked past him and kept going. Each step felt deliberate, like I was walking out of a burning house with the match still warm in my hand. I pushed through the side door and felt the air change. Crisper. Honest. The city evening pressed against my skin like a wake-up slap. My heels clacked on the pavement as I crossed the valet lane and headed to the parking garage. I didn't look back. And yet, the silence followed me. The suspense of it wrapped around my ribs. When would they notice? When would someone whisper, "Where is she?" Would they even care? Would my mother brush it off with a flick of her hand and say, "She probably stepped out for air," or would Sarah finally feel the shift, the absence of a sibling who had always stood behind her, applauded her, caught her when she fell, and absorbed the blame when she didn't? I reached my car. Silver. Clean. Paid for with years of disciplined budgeting and no help from anyone. I slipped into the driver's seat and closed the door. The slam was final, but quiet. I didn't start the engine yet. Just sat there, fingers curled around the wheel, staring at the hotel entrance. No one burst out. No one came running. No one sent a bridesmaid after me. They were still dancing. Still laughing. Still basking in the illusion of family perfection. And I had left the illusion behind, like peeling off wet, choking skin. I had always been the one to smooth things over. The one to text first. The one to apologize for other people's behavior just to keep the peace. The one who absorbed insults wrapped in fake concern, who smiled through being ignored, who showed up because that's what good daughters do. But I was done. I was done. My phone lit up. A message. From Dad, everything okay? Haven't seen you. The words were hollow. Not even a question mark. No urgency. No concern. Just a performance of awareness. I stared at it, thumb hovering. I could respond. Say I was fine. Say I had a headache. Let them off the hook so they could return to their party with their self-images intact. But that would make this another moment I erased myself to protect their comfort. So I didn't answer. I turned the screen off. Let it go black. Let it reflect my face back to me, expressionless, but for once, not defeated. Calm. I started the engine. The hum of it grounded me. My body had stopped trembling. Even my breathing had steadied. There was power in this choice. Not storming out. Not screaming. Just leaving. Quietly. Fully. On my terms. And in that quiet, I knew, this silence would haunt them. Because nothing confuses a manipulative family more than the person they once controlled refusing to play their role. My absence would be louder than any confrontation. They would spin their stories. They always did. Maybe I'd be labeled dramatic, sensitive, ungrateful. Maybe they'd tell relatives I had a mental health issue, that I was always distant, that I never tried. It didn't matter. Not anymore. Their version of me was never mine to fix. The car pulled onto the main road, headlights slicing through the dark. I didn't rush. I let the city pass me by, storefronts glowing, strangers laughing on sidewalks, lives unfolding without knowledge of the quiet war I had just declared. And yes, it was a war. Not with weapons. Not even with words. But with distance. With silence. With refusal. They had trained me to endure anything. They hadn't prepared for me to walk away without looking back. A red light caught me. I rolled to a stop and finally allowed myself to exhale. Not relief. But release. I had always thought healing would feel like joy. Instead, it felt like stillness. Like no longer needing to explain. No longer seeking permission to matter. Another notification buzzed. From Sarah, where'd you go? 4 words. Casual. Like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't been seated in a hallway like a mistake. Like she hadn't orchestrated my invisibility for her big day. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The tone was already in my bones, guiltless, performative, too little too late. They'd feel it soon. The gap. The absence of my usual it's okay. The missing presents at Christmas. The unreturned calls when financial chaos came knocking again. The sudden shift when legal documents needed a signature and I, the reliable scapegoat, wasn't there to make their problems disappear. I knew them. Knew their blind spots. Their debts. Their entanglements. Their secrets. And they had just lost the one person who kept them hidden. The light turned green. And I drove. Slowly. Silently. Knowing that somewhere inside that ballroom, the music was still playing. But someone had finally noticed I was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. I sat in the center of my apartment, dim lighting, silence stretching across every surface like tension on the edge of snapping, and I let the truth breathe. For years, I'd carried these pieces like splinters, too small to prove anything on their own, but painful all the same. Little betrayals, quiet manipulations, all brushed aside as family dynamics, as normal. But that night, with the memory of that hallway chair still seared into my spine, I realized something that shifted everything. I wasn't powerless. I never had been. I'd just been taught to believe I was. My laptop screen glowed as I clicked open a folder buried beneath layers of subfolders, innocuous titles, a digital disguise I had created for my own safety. I had named it Miscellaneous Receipts so no one would ever bother. Inside were years of emails, contracts, transaction logs. Not because I ever planned to use them, but because I knew the kind of family I came from. I knew that in a narcissistic family system, silence is survival, but documentation is insurance. And I had documented everything. It started with the business. A vintage furniture company, registered 6 years ago under a name I didn't recognize, until I saw my own on the registration line. I remembered the conversation now, barely disguised. My mother had called it a favor. They couldn't get approval in their names because of some credit issues, and I had better standing. "It's nothing," she had said. "Just a formality." I was 24, naive, exhausted from working 2 jobs. I agreed without reading the fine print. What they didn't mention was that the business account would be tied to my taxes. That any financial fallout would land on me. Then there were the accounts. I opened one with my father when I was still in college, meant for emergency transfers. He used it liberally, often for Sarah. I'd see random deposits and withdrawals, the balance dipping dangerously close to overdraft before being filled again just enough to stay legal. When I confronted him once, he laughed. "It's family money. It all evens out." But it never did. I had screen grabbed everything. And then there was the will. 2 years ago, my father had asked me to fix his printer. He wasn't tech savvy, and I was always the one they called for anything mildly complicated. While navigating his desktop, I'd found a PDF labeled estate_draft. I shouldn't have looked. But curiosity and trauma make a dangerous mix. Inside was a preliminary draft of his will, nothing legally binding yet, but enough to sting. Everything of value, the house, the savings, the life insurance, was earmarked for Sarah. I wasn't even named. Not even as a backup. I emailed it to myself. That night, staring at the glowing screen, I opened that file again. My name still missing. Erased not in a burst of cruelty, but in the quiet certainty of who they valued. They didn't plan to give me anything. They didn't even expect me to survive on my own. I was just supposed to endure. Absorb. Disappear. But I hadn't disappeared. I had been paying attention. I clicked open the business account records next. The vintage store hadn't made much, but the expenses, they told another story. Thousands in withdrawals. Payments labeled reimbursement. Some tagged with Sarah's initials. I knew that name on the credit card. It was hers. They had been using me as a financial front while keeping me emotionally locked out. And now, Sarah had married Daniel. A man with a family inheritance. A man who had asked for a prenup Sarah never signed. A man who once flirted with me after a dinner party, late at night, after one too many drinks, cornering me in the kitchen with a smile too long, a laugh too intimate. I hadn't told anyone. Because who would believe me over Sarah's golden glow? But I remembered. And I knew something else. Daniel's family had influence. Quiet power. A network of lawyers and real estate ties. And now, Sarah was legally linked to that. Which meant my family was, too. I could already feel my mother's strategy unfolding, ingratiate herself to his parents, spin the image of a supportive, loving family. Leverage the marriage for access, for loans, for status. It had always been that way. People were tools. Reputation was currency. Love was conditional. But I had my own currency now. I pulled out a worn leather binder from the back of my closet. Inside, printouts, annotated bank statements, notarized letters from financial institutions, screenshots of text messages. I had built this slowly, unintentionally, over time. Every betrayal added a page. Every denial added a sticky note. At first, I think it was just a coping mechanism. Proof I wasn't imagining it. But now it looked like strategy. I flipped through the pages, heart steady, hands sure. It was all here. Not just evidence of their financial manipulation, but their pattern. Their pathology. They used people. They discarded them. And they always made themselves the victim when confronted. But what would happen if someone flipped the script? If someone like me, not the loud one, not the golden one, but the underestimated one, suddenly made them answer for every hidden debt? It wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be dramatic. It would be quiet. Legal. Documented. A call to the IRS. A letter to the Business Bureau. A polite inquiry about the LLC I was supposedly running. A signature withdrawn. A lease voided. A clause enacted. Slowly, their little empire would begin to tilt. Not collapse, not yet. But wobble. Enough to make them wonder. Enough to make them panic. And then, when they reached out, when they tried to pull me back into the fold with sugar-laced apologies and revisionist history, I would smile. And say no. I leaned back in my chair, the binder heavy on my lap. For the first time I felt something unfamiliar. Not rage. Not grief. Something cleaner. Control. This wasn't revenge for the hallway seat. That chair was just the final straw. This was about a lifetime of being treated like the disposable one. The strong one. The forgettable one. And finally standing in the power they never expected me to claim. I placed the binder carefully on the table, aligned the pages, closed the cover. My phone buzzed again. From Mom, I hope you're not mad. It wasn't personal. Oh, but it was. It always had been. I didn't respond. Instead, I reached for a fresh legal pad. At the top, I wrote in neat block letters. Next steps. Because I wasn't waiting anymore. I was planning. Silence, when wielded correctly, is not absence, it's domination. The first morning I didn't answer my mother's call, I felt the tremor ripple across a bridge they thought they'd burned and rebuilt 1,000 times. The second time, it was a shift. The third, a crack. I didn't announce my departure from the family narrative. I simply stopped auditioning for the role they had cast me in. No dramatic declarations, no long-winded texts. Just silence. My phone lit up with their attempts, voicemails that danced between confusion and guilt-tripping. We're worried, my mother said in one. You've always been sensitive, she said in another. That word. Sensitive. Their favorite code for, stop noticing what we're doing to you. I deleted the messages without listening to them fully. I wasn't interested in their confusion. It was my design. I changed my social media settings. Archived photos. Unfollowed relatives. I didn't block anyone, that would have given them something to point at. Instead, I became invisible in plain sight. No updates. No posts. No invitations to comment. I didn't exist for their performance audience anymore. My silence became a mirror they couldn't look away from. And the longer it stretched, the more their discomfort grew. They began reaching out to people adjacent to me. A cousin messaged, "Your mom said she hasn't heard from you, is everything okay?" I replied with one sentence, "Everything is exactly as it should be." And I left it at that. Control. It was intoxicating, not in a vengeful way, but in the way oxygen must feel to someone who's been drowning. I realized how many years I'd spent managing their feelings, smoothing over their lies, patching holes in their chaos. This silence, was the withdrawal of unpaid labor. and without me, their image began to warp. Sarah tried to compensate, posting curated family photos with long, performative captions. My absence screamed through them. There was always a space where I should have been. But I was no longer interested in being the decoration to their dysfunction. Instead, I consulted professionals. Quietly. Methodically. I met with a tax attorney about the business registered in my name. I brought the binder, evidence layered with tabs and annotations. The attorney raised an eyebrow as he flipped through it. "You've got them pinned to the wall," he muttered. I didn't smile. "I'm not looking for a war," I said. "Just boundaries they can't legally violate." He nodded. We drafted dissolution documents. I paid in full. No delays. No questions. Then came the call to the state business registrar. Then the quiet inquiry about unpaid property taxes on a shared rental they had covertly linked to my name. I had the paperwork. I always had the paperwork. It was never about catching them, it was about waiting for the moment they'd be caught. This was it. Meanwhile, their texts turned frantic. Sarah finally broke character. "Why are you doing this? You're acting crazy." That word again. Another favorite. I didn't reply. I forwarded it to my lawyer, who flagged it. "You may want to begin documenting emotional harassment," she advised. "You're not just disentangling. You're triggering collapse." I nodded. That was the point. At night, I sat with spreadsheets and affidavits while wedding photos flooded the family group chat I had long muted. In one image, my mother smiled beside Sarah, arm looped around her waist, both wearing identical pearl earrings. My earrings. A gift from our grandmother meant for me. I'd found out months ago that my mother had quietly passed them to Sarah before the engagement. I hadn't mentioned it. I never confronted her. But seeing them on Sarah's ears now? It didn't sting. It solidified something. They'd stolen so much over the years. My trust. My patience. My name. But they had never touched my mind. They couldn't. And now, that mind was dismantling their system, clean, slow, inevitable. 3 weeks passed in silence. Then 4. On the 5th, something new arrived. A letter. Formal. Certified mail. From their lawyer. I opened it slowly, carefully. Inside was a notice regarding the business. Proposed transition of ownership, it said. Seeking formal reassignment of financial responsibility to the current managing parties. Translation, they wanted out of the trap they'd built. Because with my legal steps in motion, their liability had shifted. And now they were scrambling. I ran my fingers over the letterhead. The paper was thick. Expensive. Meant to intimidate. It didn't. I called my lawyer. She laughed when she read it. "They're panicking," she said. "You've pulled the first thread, and the sweater's coming apart." She drafted a response. Formal. Emotionless. We denied the transition. We outlined violations. We referenced the documents. Every move I made was legal. Every step documented. Every word weighted. And still, I said nothing to them directly. They didn't understand how silence could be used as a scalpel. That's the thing about toxic family systems. They depend on noise. On drama. On bait. They throw words like grenades and wait for you to catch them. When you don't respond, when you become unreachable, not out of spite, but strategy, it destabilizes everything. Who are they without their scapegoat? Who are they when no one is cleaning up behind them? The group chat exploded one morning. I knew because screenshots landed in my inbox via a distant cousin with a conscience. Sarah was raging. My mother was passive-aggressive. My father silent. I didn't join. I never would again. Then came the email from the accountant. Please confirm the dissolution of the joint entity. Final filings are ready. It was the moment. The line between before and after. I stared at it for a long time, then clicked confirm. With that, the first legal step was filed. No fireworks. No screaming match. Just a simple confirmation. A thread cut. A structure beginning to collapse. And somewhere, in the echo of my silence, they began to feel it. The absence of me. And the presence of consequence. The first domino fell with a soft click, inaudible to them, seismic to me. The email confirming the business dissolution processed quietly in the early hours of a Tuesday. No headlines. No noise. Just a string of internal system updates from the state office and a confirmation receipt that landed in my inbox like a whispered checkmate. I stared at the timestamp. 3:12 a.m. poetic. The hour when predators sleep and strategists move. I went about my day like nothing had happened. Morning coffee. A quiet walk. My phone remained face down. Their chaos wasn't mine anymore. But I knew, the moment that paper went through, everything tied to my name, everything they had built atop my silence, would start to unravel. And I wasn't wrong. By Thursday, my mother called 3 times before 10 a.m. I didn't answer. I imagined her sitting at the breakfast bar, phone gripped tight, mouth pursed in that way she always did when something threatened her illusion of control. I imagined my father at his desk, rifling through folders he barely understood, wondering where the error was. He wouldn't guess it was me. Not yet. In their story, I was still the compliant one. The problem solver. The reliable good girl who never made a mess, only cleaned up theirs. That was their fatal miscalculation. The second domino came in the form of a bank freeze. A shared account tied to the dissolved business, one they had routed payments through without ever telling me. An automated fraud alert triggered when the entity's legal name no longer matched the active account holders. The bank did what it always does when things don't add up, it locked everything. I knew the sequence well. I'd studied it. I'd even confirmed it with the bank during one of my silent inquiries. Not malicious, just procedural. But to them, it would feel like sabotage. By Friday afternoon, I received a message from a number I didn't recognize. Hi. This is Daniel. We're in Italy. Your parents are trying to reach you. It's urgent. I read it twice, slowly. Then again, savoring the weight of it. Daniel. My sister's new husband. The man who once looked through me at family dinners like I was insulation. The man who had now, inevitably, become entangled in the web they spun. I wondered if Sarah had told him about the documents. About the financial dependencies she'd never disclosed. Probably not. Golden children never do. They move through life assuming someone else is absorbing the cost of their sparkle. I didn't respond. Instead, I went home and opened the ledger. My quiet archive of every agreement, transaction, and digital signature. A chronological anatomy of their manipulation. Now, each page was a landmine they hadn't seen coming. And I wasn't even detonating them. I was simply letting gravity do its work. The third domino came with a phone call from my lawyer. Their attorney reached out, she said, voice calm, efficient. They're requesting a joint meeting to discuss misunderstandings. I smiled. That's the word they're using? Exactly that, she confirmed. They're claiming the dissolution has unintended financial repercussions. Which, of course, it does. Let it stand, I said. No meetings. You're right. Just know, they're going to escalate. I'm counting on it. Because the more they scrambled, the more they'd expose. My strategy wasn't brute force, it was exposure. Let them tear open their own secrets trying to cover the ones they forgot they buried in my name. That weekend, Sarah posted a photo from the Amalfi Coast. Her face was tight, strained behind the filter. The caption said, loving every second of paradise water wavering dizzy, but the comments told another story. Hope everything's okay at home? Your mom looked stressed at lunch. Call me, it's important. The mask was slipping. The shine was dimming. And the silence from me, still total. It wasn't about revenge anymore. Not fully. It was about correction. A course they set years ago when they decided I existed to serve their comfort, and now, for the first time, they were feeling the weight of their own architecture cracking. The walls they built with stolen trust. The roof that sagged under the pressure of secrets, lies, financial manipulation. Then came the fourth domino. An email from the property management company tied to the rental unit. One I had apparently co-owned on paper, without ever seeing a dime. They were requesting clarification on overdue property taxes, now triggered by the change in ownership status. It was the final crack. The quiet fuse they'd lit years ago finally reached the powder. I sent them my notarized withdrawal form. 1 page. Clean signature. No explanation. That same night, my father called for the first time in weeks. I let it ring. He left a voicemail. Look. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what you think you're doing, but you're going to ruin everything. Do you understand that? You're overreacting. This isn't how families handle things. I replayed it once. His voice shook. Not with rage. With fear. Good. Because finally, they were feeling it. The uncertainty. The same fog I had lived in for decades, where nothing was solid, nothing was clear, and every decision was made over your head, then blamed on you. Now, they were in it. And I was the one holding the map. The last domino of the week came wrapped in an email marked urgent. Subject line, request for discussion before further legal action. I stared at it for a long time. They weren't threatening me. They were pleading. Which meant they finally realized something crucial. I wasn't bluffing. I wasn't scared. And I wasn't theirs anymore. They had lost access to me. Emotionally. Financially. Strategically. They thought I'd break under the weight of silence. But silence was the weapon they trained me to use. I just finally turned it around. It started with the photos. Carefully curated, filtered to perfection, uploaded to social media with captions like "the happiest day of our lives" and "surrounded by love and family." There she was, Sarah, spinning in her designer gown, caught mid-laugh beneath chandeliers. My mother frozen in mid-toast, her expression sculpted and polished. My father, tight-lipped beside Daniel, pretending to smile. Frame after frame told a story of elegance, intimacy, unity. And I wasn't in a single one. Not one mention. Not even a blurry background shot. For weeks, they'd tried to pretend it didn't matter. That my absence wasn't notable. That I hadn't left before the cake was cut. Before the speeches. Before the obligatory family dance. That I hadn't walked out of the building and taken every unspoken secret with me like smuggled explosives. But smiles age badly when they're built on fractures. It began as whispers. A former co-worker of Sarah's left a comment under one of the group portraits, "Where's your sister?" I thought she was part of the wedding party. No reply. Then another, "Wait, didn't she help fund your business a while back?" Soon, messages started appearing in the background. Not on their walls, people were too polite for that. But in DMs, group chats. Quiet questions, "Is everything okay with your family? Was there some kind of falling out?" Sarah deleted the first batch of comments. Blocked a few users. But the internet is a living, breathing entity. You don't silence it. You feed it or it eats you. And I stayed silent. I watched the facade unravel with clinical calm. Because that's what this was, a facade. A decades-old PR campaign that had finally outlived its purpose. The story of the close-knit family. The brilliant sister. The proud parents. The well-behaved second daughter. The narrative they paraded in front of friends, neighbors, church groups. A story I had supported, wordlessly, out of guilt. Out of trauma. Now it was bleeding at the edges. The legal notices didn't help. The LLC filings were public record, easily searchable. So were the dissolution notices. A few people noticed. One of Sarah's old college friends posted a TikTok breaking down the tea on a wedding scandal you didn't know you were watching, complete with screenshots and a side-by-side of me at an old family event versus my glaring absence from the wedding. It gained traction. A few thousand views. Then tens of thousands. I didn't share it. I didn't need to. They were being seen now in the way they had made me invisible. The reversal was surgical. Poetic. My humiliation, that hallway seat, the forgotten invitation, the way my mother avoided eye contact as I stood alone, was now theirs. They couldn't explain my absence without unraveling the lie. They couldn't reach out without admitting guilt. So they flailed. I heard from a distant aunt first. "Sweetheart, this thing online, is it true? Should I be worried?" I replied only once, "No need to worry. Just watch." Sarah stopped posting altogether. Then came the profile purge. Comments limited. Stories locked. Her Instagram feed, once a glowing reel of beach waves and designer bags, now reduced to 3 posts. The wedding video was gone. The caption that once read "the best day of my life" had been edited to memories. Neutral. Hollow. The calls came again, more frequent now. My mother's voice shaking. My father silent but always on the line. I never answered. They'd lost the right to my voice the day they put me in a hallway and smiled for cameras without me. And then, one night, the knock came. Not metaphorical. A real, physical knock. My building's concierge called up first, said a woman was here to see me. No appointment. No message. Just, here. I went down. She was waiting just inside the lobby, Sarah. Her hair pulled back, dark circles under her eyes that no concealer could hide. Her posture no longer regal. She looked smaller somehow. As if the weight of the lies had finally begun to press down. She turned when she saw me and her lips parted, but no words came. I said nothing. Just watched her. And for the first time, she didn't look like my sister. She looked like someone I used to know. "Can we talk?" she asked, voice brittle, breaking on the edges. I tilted my head slightly. Said nothing. "Please," she added, more desperate this time. I didn't know all of it. I didn't know how bad it got. I wanted to laugh, but the sound stayed in my throat. Didn't know. As if ignorance was an excuse. As if she hadn't watched it all happen. As if she hadn't benefited from it. "What do you want to talk about?" I asked finally, voice even. Controlled. Her lip quivered. "The internet is going crazy. Mom is losing it. Dad won't say anything but he's not okay. I can't fix this if I don't understand what you're doing." I took a step closer. "You can't fix it," I said. "Because it's not broken. It's just finally being seen." She blinked, stunned. I could see it then, the cracks spreading behind her eyes. The moment when entitlement collapsed into realization. "You're really not going to stop, are you?" she whispered. "This is me stopping," I said. Stopping the silence. Stopping the enabling. Stopping the cycle. But it's going too far. People are asking questions. Daniel's family is," she broke off, swallowing hard. "He's furious. His mother called me a liability." I felt a flicker of something then. Not joy. Not vengeance. Just balance. Because for the first time in our lives, she was experiencing what I had lived for years, being blamed for something she couldn't control, being left alone to explain what others had done. My humiliation had turned into her reckoning. She reached out, as if to grab my hand. I stepped back. Her fingers froze midair. She dropped them slowly. Her mouth moved like she wanted to say something more. Something sincere. Maybe even sorry. But nothing came out. There was nothing left to say. I have to go, I said, turning. And as I walked away, I felt the final fracture. The golden child, no longer glowing. Just another woman unraveling in the lobby of a life she thought was untouchable. The call came at 6:42 p.m. on a Tuesday, just as the sun dipped behind the skyline and cast long shadows across my apartment floor. It was the number I used to know by heart, their landline, anchored in the kitchen where my mother once cooked meals while ignoring my silence, where my father barked business calls and told me to keep my voice down, where Sarah once sobbed into the receiver about a breakup and I offered comfort I was never given. That kitchen, with its polished counters and poisoned air, now echoed in the ringtone that filled my living room like a ghost arriving late to its own funeral. I let it ring 4 times. Not out of hesitation, out of power. I wanted them to feel the stretch of waiting, the cold steel of being unsure. The way I had felt my entire life. When I picked up, I didn't say hello. I let the silence greet them first. My mother's voice came through, brittle and rehearsed. We need to talk. 4 words. No apology. No ownership. Just control, disguised as an olive branch. I leaned back on the couch, crossed one leg over the other. Then talk. A pause. The first crack. She cleared her throat. There's been confusion. And you're clearly upset. We never wanted things to get to this point. Did you want them to get to a point? I asked, my voice low, calm. Or were you just hoping I'd keep absorbing everything until there was nothing left of me? My father spoke next, his voice strained, quieter than I remembered. You've made your point. But this is spiraling now. People are asking questions. The accountant's panicking. Your sister's dealing with enough already. There it was. The priority. The performance. Protect the image. Protect the golden child. I laughed. Just once. You still think this is about punishment? About vengeance? But this isn't revenge. This is math. Cause and effect. You taught me silence. I just gave it back to you with interest. My mother cut in, defensive. You've embarrassed the entire family. No, I said. I've revealed it. Another silence. I could hear her breathing. That tight, nasal inhale I remembered from childhood arguments, right before she'd call me disrespectful for stating how I felt. The nostalgia of dysfunction, wafting through the line. You always had a flair for drama, she snapped, mask slipping. We tried to include you. No, I said sharply. You included my labor. My money. My signature. My silence. But not me. Not when it mattered. Not when it was public. Not when it meant something. I was good enough to co-sign your failures but not good enough to sit at the table when guests arrived. My father sighed. It was one mistake. No, I whispered, venom soft. It was a blueprint. They tried again to shift. They begged. Bargained. My mother said she was under pressure. That Sarah had insisted on certain things. That the venue messed up. All half-truths wrapped in plausible deniability. It was almost impressive, how they tried to spin the narrative back in real time, weaving new fictions out of exposed seams. But I wasn't there to argue. I wasn't there to comfort them or help them clean up the fallout. I was there to show them what it felt like to speak and not be heard. So I did something I'd never done before. I cut them off. I'm not interested in apologies you don't mean. I'm not here to help you salvage your image. This isn't a conversation. It's a notification. A pause. What kind of notification? My mother asked, the edge of fear curling her voice. That I'm done. You're done with what? She asked. With pretending, I said. With hoping you'll change. With carrying the weight of a family that only calls when something needs fixing. I've withdrawn my name from everything. The business. The property. The tax accounts. I've notified the necessary parties. You'll get the paperwork by the end of the week. You can't just do that, my father started. I already did. They weren't used to this version of me. The one who didn't yell, who didn't beg, who didn't cry. This version wasn't built on anger. It was built on clarity. Cold, crystalline truth that cut deeper than any emotional outburst ever could. But we're family, my mother said, soft now. Manipulative. You don't just abandon your family. You abandoned me years ago, I replied. I'm just returning the favor. Then I told them about the folder. The one with every transaction. Every email. Every time they used me as a shield or a pawn. I told them I kept records not because I wanted revenge, but because I never felt safe. And they made me right. I won't expose you, I said finally. I don't need to. You're doing that yourself. But I won't protect you either. We were just trying to hold everything together, my father murmured. No, I said. You were trying to hold up a lie. I'm just walking away from it. There was a long, hollow silence on the line. I imagined them sitting in their kitchen. Maybe still in their curated clothes. Surrounded by the wreckage of their own denial. I imagined my mother clutching her phone like it could still fix something. My father finally seeing me, not as an extension of his plans, but as a person who had stepped entirely out of his reach. Then my mother asked, so what now? You just disappear? No, I said. I just stop answering when I'm not being asked a real question. Her voice cracked. What do you want from us? Nothing, I said. That's the whole point. And then, silence. No defense. No plea. Just static. Finally, the absence of performance. It was the purest moment we'd ever shared. I waited. Just to make sure it stayed. Just to mark the end. Then I hung up. No goodbye. Because some endings don't need words. They only need silence. The final chapter of my story doesn't end with a confrontation or a reunion, it ends with a quiet decision to never walk back into that house of mirrors again. I stopped returning calls. Stopped justifying my distance. I didn't send a holiday card. I didn't answer when the family group chat tried to resurrect itself with small talk and fake concern. I chose stillness over chaos, solitude over performance. That was my revenge, not fury, not public exposure, but letting them sit in the reality they built without me as their scapegoat. The story they controlled for so long is now crumbling in silence, and I'm not there to save it. They've begun rewriting history, I'm sure. That I was always distant, always difficult. But I don't need to correct them. Their consequences are truth enough. I didn't burn the bridge, I simply refused to keep repairing it alone. My healing didn't come from punishing them. It came from remembering myself. And in that, I won. If you've ever chosen self-respect over silence, walked away not to make a scene, but to reclaim your peace, tell me. I'm listening now. They thought seating me in the hallway would erase me, but it was the moment I finally stood at the center of my own life.